Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about what we actually learnt in creating our really active VR game, Smash It Plunder. So this is the game. The idea is that you're running around a dungeon in 3D space, collecting as much treasure loot as possible by just destroying the place and wrecking it, smashing things up. We started it in June 2014, originally on the DK1. We knew what we wanted for our final hardware, we just didn't have it yet. And then now we've moved to the Gear VR with online leaderboard, as you can see there. So first thing we did is we looked at the platform we were actually making our game for. It's amazing how many people start designing a game with just ignoring all these aspects. So it's looking at the advantages and the limitations of that platform and really working your idea to it. So first of all, VR is great for exploring spaces, 3D objects in front of you, and for empathy. So we knew that our idea had to have something to do with at least one of those aspects. And the Gear device itself is wireless, so we felt, well, something that really wants you to get to move around and turn around in 3D space. And then the fact it actually had controls built in just meant we naturally wanted to create a game using those controls. Its limitations, of course, is that it is running on a mobile phone, which is a limited device. It's only got so much power and battery life. Also, there are so many cool devices out there that they could work for, but our players might not necessarily have them. And we have limited time, limited budget, and limited team size. So it's just creating a game idea that's really scalable. So, for example, looking at limitations, you think, well, that touchpad, it's basically just one button. What am I going to do with that? Well, there's quite a lot. It's like you've got touching, you've got holding, you've got delta position, as in like tracking different ways, you've got gestures, you haven't got multi-touch, but then you roll all those things in and you start making things like making the controls context sensitive within your gameplay. Just means you can get away with a lot more. So once you've got your initial sort of rough ideas of what your platform's going to be like, you want to be looking at your game concept. And it's a really good idea to come up with these key pillars of what your game wants to be. For example, in Smash It Plunder, the two best ones for us were really agency and tactile. So agency is making sure that the player feels like they're actually doing something within the game. They've got some control over what they're doing. And tactile, because I feel like in VR, and especially in these early days, it's really important to make it feel like it's real, like there's something there, there's really something worth touching. And you can do that with the art style and the gameplay. So the other thing that we ended up doing was actually taking inspiration from other games. It's really useful to just create a little short board like this, just to show you the rest of your team members, because immediately you can go understand what you're trying to achieve. It doesn't have to be games, it could be films or board games or TV or books. But for example, the Lego games we saw, okay, well, you smash things and you get lots of treasure. It just makes you want to go around the level smashing every single tiny bit of Lego you can find. We want to try and capture that and put that within our game. So the next thing you want to be looking at is your comfort. You need to design this in from the start because it can have a serious effect on your gameplay. You also want to be looking at potential other comfort options other than just going, okay, well, I'm sure we can hack it in at some point, or it's just going to be on or off, because players range from like being able to go, okay, I can basically deal with anything, I don't want snappy turns, or they can go to the type of player where it's like, okay, I need as much I can do, because as much you can give me, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to play any VR game in my life. But as a developer, you want to feel like, well, where am I going to draw this line? For example, if you have forward-only gameplay in a large cockpit, which is like the most VR-friendly thing you can do, it means that, well, ultimately, can you really make a game about exploring 3D space? So we moved ours a bit further down this sort of scale. But then, of course, there's things that you need to definitely put in, such as the high FPS and the no screen freezing that most games should do. Looking into what it did for Smash It Plunder, to go somewhere, you look to where you want to go to, and you tap to go there. First thing is that we actually show you where you're heading. So you've got this predicted path, which is acting like a travelator. We do that with the little feet icons. The next thing we do is actually have your hand and your book with you, and it's trying to act as a frame of reference with you all the time. Then we've got something called the stabilization cubes, which are these little tiny magic dust bits you can see floating around. And what they do is trying to act as an internal static skybox, which is actually staying with the player rather than the world. So it feels like the world is moving beneath you rather than you're moving within the world. Just trying to fool your brain to say, don't worry, you're staying still, your d-force is fine. Then what we ended up doing was, what we're testing over there right now is 2 different kinds of modes where even if this is not enough, like we've got things such as like when you do rotation turning, you do snap turning to try and make people not feel quite so ill. We've got that actually when you're moving forward as well, so it's snap moving forward. And then we also do a mode where we darken and bring in the fog, so it feels like you're blinking, and then you open up and you arrive in your space correctly. So if you feel particularly vulnerable to VR games and 3D exploration, it'd be great if you can give it a go and see which one you prefer. The next thing you want to do is how are you going to get the player to feel like they're actually within that world? This is like when the tactileness comes in. It's like, am I just observer in that world, or like you want to feel like they've got some sort of agency within that world? So there's little things that you can do, such as just making sure there's some sort of shadow for the player, or footprints and reflections. Obviously, reflections, you don't make sure it's not direct to the player. We don't know what they look like. But even just dust motes coming up, so it feels like the world is reacting to the player. They're actually inside of there. And of course, world interaction, you physically are interacting with props in the world, and this is what we do for Smash It Plunder. You are picking up the objects and you're smashing them. You're turning a really pretty space I made for you, and you're making a mess of it. Next, as well, in terms of your environmental design, first of all, get the scale right. Made that mistake. Ended up costing us a couple of weeks. We're just remodeling all the props to make sure they're the right sizes. Of course, making sure there's no buggy geometry. Now, coherent world is what I mean by that is when I drop a glass and expect it to shatter. Now, this doesn't mean it's a realistic world. It just means that these are rules which I expect to happen within the world you've created for me. If you've made one rule somewhere and break it somewhere else, that's going to break me out of the immersion. What we also do is reward exploring. If you send a player off and they go off into a corner of the room that you weren't expecting, you need something there to make it feel like it's their worth. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be treasure. It could be narrative or story narrative, just a little aspect of the game. When you come to scaring the player, I thought about creating these sort of safe spaces. Is this a quick response button that you press rather than taking off the HMD? Is this the pause menu, just lighten up the whole area, go, okay, it's fine, don't worry? Or is this actually an area of the level where they feel like they can sort of run to within the game and just know they're safe? Potentially, of course, you can always just have an alternate route that might require more skill, but then the player knows that they won't be scared going down there or have to face their biggest phobia. When we actually created our first space, we found that players didn't know to turn their heads. And we still have a little bit of a problem, so you can actually turn around, you know. So to do that, we actually faced the player facing a door, just straight in front of them. We changed that to a wall, because originally they tried to go through the door, of course. But we also found that we didn't really know which way they were going to turn. So some turned to the right, and they saw the room straight away, and that was all well and good. Some turned to the left and saw this visually complexing bookcase, which is the first 3D object they've ever seen in their life. And they go, oh wow, this is gorgeous and pretty, and spend their 2 minutes just tearing apart the one bookcase, ignoring the rest of the dungeon. So just making sure that the first area you create is just a little more bland, a little more sort of calm and relaxing, and actually mirrored, because you just don't know where they're going to go first. What also what to do was, when as a game is an arcade game, we rely a lot on our timers at the moment, and originally our timers were just a little bit too short, and that's because we didn't realise, oh yeah, of course, people are just going to spend more time looking rather than actually going and just playing the game straight away. So what we actually have now in our tutorial room is that we switch off the timer entirely, just let you go, and then as soon as you enter the main dungeon, we start the game. Of course, at some point, you're going to need some sort of menus and UI within your game, just like a pause menu, or to tell the player how much time is left. So, for example, what we had to do was in our game, we had to show the player the time. So with that, we had the inventory prop, which is our book. And this is something the player always carries with them. They have this reference they can look down and check to. Or you can potentially have valuable gameplay information, such as what we did here in Book of Potions, was have a temperature gauge actually within the pot as an actual thermometer, rather than a big number plastered all over the screen. So it's just making like contextual objects within the game to make sure the player just gets absorbed and they can look at those objects when they need to. So talking about how the time actually developed, originally this was actually a timer on the wall, which just made sense. It's like there's a big fat time on the wall, people can see this massive number, it's vibrant white compared to everything else. But what we found was that players were too busy just destroying everything and not even necessarily even looking in that direction to notice the time. So they moved it down to a watch on their hand, which made sense. You sort of check your time, you look down at your watch. But then what we found was because the hands are things that move around, you didn't necessarily have it with you all the time. And we needed to display a lot more information for our new scavenger hunt mode, where we actually tell you to look for specific objects. So that's where it turns to this magical book, which is something that's dynamic and can change. And of course, with a book, you can change the page. So it makes sense that, okay, I need to refresh the screen. A couple of notes on implementation as well, obviously keeping it at 60. But when it comes to crosshairs, we recently had to change from like a normal crosshair, which is set as a static distance away, to this almost like this laser pointer, which changes according to like what you're looking at. And that's because when we had the static crosshair and there was something in front of it that was actually close to us in real space, it fought and made our eyes go, oh, what's that? That's this horrible little dot that's trying to make me believe that the book's further away than it actually is. So just a little tip there. The biggest thing for us is playtesting. There's only 2 of us, so it's do it, get out and about, actually go to events, but most importantly is listen to people and not arguing back with them, which is actually really hard. You go, yes, I know. But just listen and take it in, and you don't have to explain why you chose to do something all the time to them. And just watch what they're doing. So in the Gear VR, this is really interesting because obviously there's no screen for us to watch. You get that for free with the normal DK2 units. So what we do is actually remap the positional data of the game into a server version, which allows us to spawn this 2D map of where you're going and what you're looking at, and record. So that what also allows us to do is to take what you're picking up and the loot you're collecting and what you went to first and just storing that somewhere, so as a level designer I can go back and improve. And then when it comes to actually designing the space, this is not just designing a virtual space, it's designing the space which players are first going to be trying out your game. So just making it really approachable. The hardware is actually, especially older hardware, is just a big black box. It's quite intimidating for older users or little kids. So it's just like we decorate it in pixels and make it look really friendly for people. And it's just trying to blend this VR world into the real world, so when the more accepting of the VR world when they come to the game. So we create little props from the games and sort of, medieval helmets, things that you could find in that virtual world, and just put it into the real world. And it's about designing the whole experience. So it's not just when the player starts the game by putting it on their head. It's when they walk into the demo room and your game is there on the table until the moment in which they walk out. And that's it.
Fantastic, brilliant. I'm sure you probably pick people putting their hands up yourself, but to justify me actually being here, does anyone have any questions? Go on, we've got to have at least one. Am I missing one? Oh, hey, brilliant. The gentleman with the check shirt in the front row.
Hi, that was really, really interesting, full of great advice. Whereabouts are you in the kind of release cycle? Are you out there selling it yet? Or?
No, we're not out selling it yet. The store's not quite ready for people to sell actual goods on it yet, but we are looking to potentially do a demo. It's all dependent on how much time we have after work to do so. So yeah, hopefully have it, well, we're looking at potentially end of March, April time I expect, for a demo at least. Also, with a game like this, it's so scalable, we have to make sure we keep ourselves going, all right, this is our minimum we can get away with, and then we expect future updates after that.
Have you thought about, sorry, just, you know, obviously it looks a bit Minecrafty inside. Have you thought about making kind of user levels that they can adjust themselves?
Not yet, and that's because there's so much in terms of optimization that you need to do to get it running. We have a lot of clever scripts that sort of merge things automatically, but it's still not quite there yet. But I'm really into player customization and allow players to basically role play and be themselves within the game. So I'd like to try and at least build that into the gameplay somehow.
Nice one. Are we done with questions? Oh, the gentleman sitting to his right.
Hello.
Hi.
When I was playing it earlier, I noticed I was more keen just on the experience of just smashing stuff up and just having a whale of a time. I wasn't actually that fussed about the whole treasure hunting, point scoring element. Have you noticed that from other people? And
Yeah, so this is in terms of like how scalable the actual concept is. So we have got the treasure rush mode, which is what you played there, the scavenger hunt mode for people who are more interested in the finding stuff. And for people that are more interested in smashing stuff, we are looking at other, I guess almost like mini-game type things. You've got a nice bull in the china shop experience when you've got all the plates arranged that you want to smash them and just pick up hammers and throw them at stuff. So we are trying to build on that, but obviously looking at our minimum game first of all and then seeing where we can grow from that.
Nice one. Brilliant. Well, thanks for the questions. We better try and stay on time this time. So thanks so much to Katie. Brilliant stuff.